Most people are exhausted, not because life is impossible, but because they are trying to control things that were never fully controllable. Other people's feelings, future outcomes, relationships, success, time, uncertainty. And the harder the mind tries to control life, the more anxious it often becomes. Which is strange, isn't it? Because control promises safety, yet obsession with control usually destroys peace. Buddhism teaches something deeply uncomfortable. Much of human suffering comes from resisting uncertainty. We want guarantees, predictable outcomes, permanent stability. But life keeps changing anyway. People change, plans fail, emotions shift, unexpected endings arrive, and the mind reacts with fear because uncertainty feels threatening. Tonight, I want to explore the illusion of control through Buddhist philosophy, mindfulness, and modern psychology, because maybe peace does not come from controlling life perfectly. Maybe peace begins when you stop fighting the nature of life itself. You may know this feeling, overthinking conversations because you want certainty, replaying situations, trying to predict outcomes, planning every detail because uncertainty makes you anxious, wanting reassurance constantly, checking messages repeatedly, trying to avoid mistakes perfectly, trying to keep people from leaving, trying to control how others see you, trying to make the future feel safe. And underneath all of it, there is usually fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of pain. Psychology explains this clearly. The human brain prefers predictability because predictability feels safer for survival. Uncertainty activates anxiety, which is why the mind constantly searches for control mechanisms. But modern life intensifies this deeply. Endless information, endless comparison, endless future planning, endless mental stimulation. And eventually, the nervous system becomes exhausted, trying to manage uncertainty constantly. Buddhism recognized this suffering long ago. The mind becomes attached to certainty in a world built on impermanence. But what if uncertainty is not the enemy? What if the real suffering comes from resisting it? Buddhism teaches that life is constantly changing. Everything moves. Thoughts, emotions, relationships, bodies, circumstances. Nothing remains fixed forever. And strangely, accepting this reality can create enormous peace, because now you stop demanding permanence from temporary things. You stop expecting life to stay frozen. You stop expecting perfect control over unpredictable experiences. Modern psychology supports this idea too. Research shows that people who develop tolerance for uncertainty often experience lower anxiety and greater emotional resilience. In other words, peace grows when the nervous system stops demanding guarantees constantly. That changes how you experience life entirely. Now uncertainty becomes something you can move with instead of something you constantly fear. Here is the painful contradiction. People want peace, but mentally fight reality all day. They resist uncertainty, resist change, resist endings, resist discomfort, resist impermanence, and resistance creates tension internally. Buddhism teaches that suffering often comes not from pain itself, but from attachment to how things should be. This relationship should not change. This plan should work perfectly. This person should stay. Life should feel certain. But life never promised permanence, which means the mind keeps trying to negotiate with reality constantly. And that negotiation becomes exhausting. Psychology calls this intolerance of uncertainty. The mind believes if I think enough, prepare enough, worry enough, maybe I can prevent pain. But excessive control rarely creates peace. It creates hypervigilance. The nervous system never fully relaxes because it is constantly preparing for danger. But something shifts when you stop trying to control every outcome. Breathing becomes easier. Conversations feel lighter. Mistakes feel survivable. Relationships feel less possessive. You begin understanding peace does not require certainty. That realization changes everything, because now life becomes something experienced, not something constantly managed. Buddhism teaches acceptance not as weakness, but as alignment with reality. Acceptance says, I cannot control everything, but I can choose how consciously I respond. And that creates emotional freedom. Now, uncertainty no longer becomes automatically panic. It becomes part of being alive, human, temporary, real. There's a Buddhist story about a man standing in a river trying to stop the water from moving. The harder he pushes against the current, the more exhausted he becomes. But the river was never the problem. His resistance was. Human beings do this psychologically. They fight change constantly, fight uncertainty constantly, fight reality constantly, and eventually the mind becomes overwhelmed. Psychology explains that chronic anxiety often comes from perceived lack of control. The brain continuously scans for certainty to reduce fear. But mindfulness interrupts this cycle. Instead of reacting automatically, awareness notices, this is uncertainty, this is fear, this is the need for control. That awareness creates space, and space weakens emotional reactivity. Buddhism teaches peace comes not from controlling the river, but from learning how to move with it. Maybe control itself is not the problem. Human beings naturally seek safety. The suffering begins when the mind demands absolute certainty from an uncertain world. Because eventually, life reminds everyone no amount of overthinking can fully control impermanence. Most anxiety lives in the future. What if something goes wrong? What if I fail? What if they leave? What if things never work out? The mind constantly imagines possible pain, trying to prepare itself emotionally. But often, imagined suffering becomes heavier than reality itself. Buddhism teaches that the future exists mostly as mental projection. Life is always unfolding now. Yet many people abandon the present moment mentally to live inside hypothetical futures. And the nervous system reacts to imagined danger as if it is happening immediately, which means the body remains tense constantly, restless constantly, alert constantly. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply. Mindfulness returns attention to reality instead of endless projection. This breath, this room, this moment, not imagined catastrophe. One of the deepest causes of suffering is attachment to outcomes. People become emotionally dependent on specific results. A relationship working, a career succeeding, a plan unfolding perfectly. And when reality moves differently, suffering appears immediately. Buddhism teaches attachment creates suffering because reality itself remains unpredictable. This does not mean becoming passive. It means acting fully without emotionally collapsing when life changes direction. There's freedom in that. You still care, still love, still try. But now your peace is not entirely destroyed by uncertainty, because you understand outcomes are never fully yours to control.
At some point, healing requires trust. Not blind optimism, not pretending pain does not exist, but trusting your ability to meet life as it unfolds. Most people think peace comes from securing the future perfectly, but often peace comes from realizing, whatever happens, I can face it. That creates internal stability. Buddhism encourages presence because presence weakens fear. The mind realizes, right now, in this moment, life is already happening. And often the present moment is far less frightening than the future imagined by anxiety. Maybe the mind cannot fully rest because it keeps trying to control what was never fully controllable. People, time, outcomes, change, life itself. But Buddhism reminds us, everything changes, and fighting that truth creates suffering. Maybe peace begins when you stop demanding certainty from life. Maybe peace begins when you stop gripping the river so tightly, because life was never meant to be controlled perfectly. It was meant to be experienced, one moment at a time. If this conversation resonated with you, tell us in the comments, what is something in your life you are learning to stop controlling? And how would your life feel if you trusted yourself enough to let go a little more?